So Rob has kindly offered to give us a brief little chat about the digging, or whatever we want to call it, of Marilyn.
I did, yes.
And we look forward to hearing that, because it involved a lot of effort. It's a rather nice entrance into Hensless Master Cave. So over to you.
Right. Marilyn story. First of all, thanks to Pete for allowing me to steal from his GG write-ups and the article in Dissent. So in the winter prior to the 2002 GG meet, Paul Norman was walking in this area, what we call the Klondike Valley, up from Barpot round to GG, and he was doing some spot holing, and he came across a small hole clear of any snow. The hole was in a shallow depression next to a deeper shake hole in which bedrock could be seen. So at the GG meet, Paul and Rick set to work on this shallow depression and were joined by Pete and Mike Whitehouse. After a couple of days digging, they eventually found a very small bedding plane on the downhill side of the dig, followed in short order further down by a very solid floor. So that's the backfill dig. That's Marilyn, where we moved to next. And the cube is there because that's quite a deep shake hole, but it's where we built a shelter and we had lunch. So Pete suggested, after this floor, that they look at the deeper shake hole next door. And by the end of the 2002 GG, we were about 7 meters down. Now, our philosophy was to keep a level floor so that we exposed all the walls of the shaft and we weren't tempted into digging down the so-called promising corners that people chase after. And we continued digging throughout that winter, and in the summer run-up to GG 2003, we experienced some wonderful weather with rainstorms from Bowland, which you could see coming, that cleaned our filthy oversuits before we even reached the plantation, to just a week later needing factor 50 sunscreen. We also discovered the second pitch in Marilyn, but it was guarded by a tombstone. So we kept that quiet until the GG event. And at GG 2003, Edward was sent down, ever the expendable, but found the floor of this pitch was full of limestone blocks closing the way on. But more of a problem was the snagginess of the shaft. Pete cured that by whacking a large flake until, of course, it was sat in his lap, much to the alarm of Edward, who was lower down. However, it was secured by a rope and the two Robs pulled it out. For those of you who are familiar with Marilyn, you will be aware that the top of the second pitch is a bit snug, and I have a feeling that this photograph actually makes it look wider than it felt. That meant hauling buckets out. They seem to snag on just about everything. That's a standard digging bucket. So the side loading bucket was developed. So less snagging, but a pullback line was used to get it back down the shaft. We then had the next problem, which was when the second shaft team shouted bucket up, the bucket waiting to be loaded at the bottom of the first shaft would suddenly disappear skyward. So we had a bit of a problem there. So originally, when we developed the side-loading bucket, Rob Dove had said that the side-loading bucket would be handy for dragging his poodle around. This was some weird allusion to Edward's involvement with Manchester's gay village. So the second shaft bucket became known as a poodle. Now, the second shaft team could call poodle up without confusing the surface hauling team. However, it's still sluggish, with spoil being moved from the poodle to the bucket before it reaches the surface. We eventually solved this problem by repositioning the 3 legs and the main pulley to allow the surface team to pull from the bottom of the second shaft. This was compromised then. It compromised the lift in the first shaft, but we solved that by attaching a second line at the top of the poodle so it could be steered by somebody who were next to the haulers. This, of course, every innovation has its consequences, and as the poodle came out the second shaft, the changeover digger had to attach the first shaft steering line to the top of the poodle and unclip the pullback line from the bottom of the poodle. Not everybody managed this with the speed and alacrity that was necessary to keep in rhythm with the hauling team. We also created more poodles so that the empty one could be sent down whilst the previous one was being emptied. We realised that we might not always have a large enough team to haul to the surface. So we built a scaffold shoring in the corner of the second shaft to hold the spoil from the base of the shaft, with Rob putting in the necessary hauling point. I should point out this is in the early days of digital photography. Quite a new, this is quite a revelation where you could take pictures willy-nilly. But over time, this scaffolding arrangement grew like topsy, acquiring extensions and going up and all sorts of things. And also around this time, I managed to create a website to show what we were doing at Marilyn. Early in 2004, Pete, we found the beginnings of the third pitch. And by Easter, we got down about 10 feet and thought we could see further on a few feet between the boulders. Our only worry was, a little worry, was that the roof of the third pitch was made up of large jam boulders that formed the floor of the second pitch, on which rested the scaffolded spoil heap. And although we'd done a lot of work, this third pitch was very frustrating. It was a mixture of chossy clay and large flaky boulders. The digging wasn't at all easy. In late June of that year, it was just Pete and I that were up there, and there was a load of previous chemical damage that needed to be dealt with. But being a bit limited in manpower numbers, we decided to rebuild the scaffold frames and move them forward. And that got a bit exciting when we dismantled the rear frame to reuse the boards in the front frame, thus releasing a torrent of spoil coming towards us. But still, it wasn't easy. I picked a note from my website of that, 24th of July, which was the day of the Royal Horticultural Society Tatton Park Flower Show. So there were lots of diggers on the hills as wives went off to Cheshire. And I wrote, "It looks as though the rift wriggles and has become narrower. The widest part seems to be at the western end, but that's all big loose flakes which are holding up the floor where we've been stacking the spoil. In the middle, the bulge from the northern wall could either be the northern wall itself or a very large detached block wedged across the rift. The eastern end may just be covered by tombstones, which offer the easiest option for removal and further progress. So looking at it is very confusing. Almost we didn't know which direction to go in. At the 2004 GG meet, Gordon made the very sensible suggestion that rather than concentrating on going down at the meet, we should use the extra manpower that's available to move the spoil caged in the second shaft to the surface to make working room for winter months when manpower numbers would be smaller. We did manage to do some work on the third pitch, which actually revealed that the northern wall was heading under. In October that year, as Pete, Dave Milner and I were walking up Clapdale Lane, we met an SRT attired John Cordingley coming towards us. He'd been on an early trip down Bar Pot, and although invited to join us and share his skills and retrace his steps, he demurred. He said he had an urgent need to mow his lawn. We didn't think this was a good enough reason. We told him that we would be round later to inspect its bowling green-like surface, which must have alternating stripes running up and down the lawn. Now, may I say how bitterly disappointed we all were when we saw the state of his lawn. Also about this time, we became aware that the Bradford were reading the website they created, because they'd often tell us about how our dig was going on. But in one of those breaks that you get during digging, when you talk about everything and anything, and it's usually rubbish, we invented the concept of the gravitational deflectometer, which could detect underground voids. As time went on, we reported various improvements to the device, supported by scientific papers and evidence produced by Patrick and Gordon. Whenever the Bradford weren't at their dig, the website would faithfully report that the prototype deflectometer had been piloted next to their dig, finding a massive void just 4 meters away from where they were digging. There were various email exchanges with them about this. We think that most of the Bradford team realised that this was a leg pull, but one member always collared us in Clapham when we met to find out how things were going, and given his earnest way of asking, we think we'd suckered him completely in. But back to the task in hand. The frustrating third pitch. On one memorable day in January 2005, we were sat in the third pitch when Milner, that's Milner on the right there, said that he admired our perseverance, given this Milner and his record of digging in Littendale. He admired our perseverance, as he would have given up by now. So you can imagine how Pete and I felt at that stage, a bit, oh. But we continued through the first half of 2005, removing blast damage and stacking it in the second pitch scaffold frame. But the roof on the left, that's the west of the third pitch, continued to look decidedly dodgy. But the draft led us in that direction. And by July, when Rick, Pete and I were present, we'd got so frustrated that we resorted to violently poking the loose tat with a scaffold pole, ignoring the consequences of what would happen if the whole of the floor fell through. But we kept knocking this stuff down. We eventually did gain a body length of passage, and the draft was howling in our faces in spite of the wedged rocks. We then came to GG 2005, and more progress was made, even though the walls were narrowing, and we could definitely hear water. This perplexed us quite a bit, as the existing surveys didn't show any large string passages below where we were, but we could just see a tantalising black space. After GG, on September the 18th, as Pete and I started up the Clapdale track, we heard a swish, swish noise. It was Ian Halliday coming down on his quad with the engine turned off. On learning that we were bound for digging on the fell, he asked if we could take his tractor up with some stuff for the other lot. That would allow him to do real work. Well, it's a difficult choice. Walk up with heavy laden packs or drive up. We opted to drive up, purely in the interest of maintaining good links with the farming community. We arrived at Bradford's dig, that was the Paysank dig near P5, unloaded their scaffolding and planks. Do you think that they would guess who delivered the stuff? We drove back to Marilyn, tractor and trailer, parked it just by the side of Marilyn, so it must have looked odd to anybody coming up and down the borough. But Pete created a hole big enough to poke his head through into the void. But then, when he looked down, he could see a rope hanging from a bolt. A bit of a shock, but we were pleased with our progress. This rope strengthened our suspicion that we had found a way into Disappointment Pot. But to get to the void, that passage wall would have to be shaved off quite a lot. This was a bit of an odd day. After we'd come out of Marilyn, we set off to drive back. And as we were driving past the Hernal Moss Fault, we saw a scaffold pole stuck in the moor, which definitely hadn't been there in the morning. We got out. Pete turns the tractor off, carefully putting the keys in his pocket in case anybody sneaked up and stole it. We had a look at the scaffold pole, just stuck in the moor, no idea why. As we were walking back to the tractor, three shapes appeared from up the Grey Wife way. It was the Ramblers. They were moving stuff from Grey Wife down to the dig near Strawberry Pot. So being gentlemen, we took the tractor up, loaded all the stuff and put it down for them. They eventually paid Pete about 4 months later. We had then a couple of trips in late September to remedy the wall problem. One was even during the working week, which for Rob Dove and the school teacher, that was some achievement. We cleared some spoil and we got Rob to put in some anchors at the top of the new pitch. By now, the extended shoring on the second shaft was seriously full. In the meantime, Pete found out that the rope in the fourth shaft had been left by Jed Ben, Bradford. So we had hit the Disappointment streamway. A visit was made in October, and Pete, Rob and Edward set off to the fourth pitch to rig it with rope. Rest of us set about hauling the spoil from below up to the surface. We had quite a team with us, so easy to do. Unfortunately, it turned out there wasn't enough rope to get to the bottom of the fourth pitch, but we had cleared a decent amount of spoil. Next day, we returned with more rope, but Gordon managed to re-rig the existing rope so the extra wasn't needed. And whilst Pete and Gordon descended into Disappointment Pot between its second and third pitches, which was a first for both of them, the rest of us raised spoil from the bottom to the surface. But with the amount of spoil in the second shaft, there was still a lot of work to do just to make that place safe. Much of the winter was spent bringing the spoil to the surface. Gordon and Nick managed to do a topo for Marilyn at the new year. And in February 2006, Pete, Rob and I went down Marilyn into Disappointment. The fourth pitch was still loose, so only one at a time on the pitch, and then hide in the downstream passage. This tactic was only partially successful, since as the two Robs sat there, something clattered down the pitch, bounced over me, and then bounced again onto the bag next to Rob Dove. By the way, in the picture, the bag is on the far side of Rob. A few more visits were made to remove the spoil and dismantle the setting shaft scaffolding. But we weren't finished. Marilyn deserved to be put to use by an inaugural trip through to the main chamber. So a trip was arranged for Saturday the 27th of May, which you will realise is during a Bradford meet. The lift out of the main chamber would be courtesy of the BPC, and it was a mirror to the Bradford's trip down Corky's now on our winch the previous August. But in organising it, we found out sadly that Rob Dove would already be on his way to Mallorca. That weekend I was leading the club's meet at Dufton, so Pete and I travelled down on the Saturday morning, while Gordon stayed at the cottage on his way up from Essex, collected all the necessary ladders and tackle. Edward just came from Skipton. Because of the earlier wet weather, the Bradford hadn't been able to rig disappointment pot, so we went with our original plan of a pull-through trip. Gordon shot off down 7-year pitch with most of the tackle, quickly followed by Pete. They soon rigged and descended Sub Like It Not. By the time I got to the top of Gentlemen Prefer Blonde, pausing only to admire the excellent walling in Sub Like It Not, Gordon and Pete were already at the top of Niagara, but we're all cautious when we descended Niagara. Whilst I waited for Edward at the bottom of Niagara, the youngsters shot off again. Steady progress was made on the pull-throughs, and we realised that Edward had last been down Disappointment Pot 40 years earlier, whereas I had last been down 20 years earlier, also on a BPC meet. But this time we had avoided the bedding plane and duck at the start. Made excellent progress. We even managed to find our way out through short Henslers, which seemed to get lower and wetter. The exit into South East Haven hasn't got easier over the years for a gentleman of my age. We made our way to the main chamber and joined the long queue to go out. It was a cold and long wait to ascend. But just as we were reaching the front of the queue, one of the Bradford came round asking cavers with SRT gear if they would go out through bar to reduce the lengthening queue. We don't know whether that was a put-up job, but when he asked us, we just politely declined. Once we reached the surface, and gantry photos had been taken, Jed led us up to their bay tent and invited us to choose a drink from those on offer. We all chose a pint of Daleside Blonde, which of course to us was known as Daleside Marilyn. And we had a lovely chat with Dave Ryle and Billy Wiz, and more photographs were taken. And after walking down to Clapham, collecting the gear on the way, we said our goodbyes to Edward and set off to Dufton to enjoy the remainder of the bank holiday meet. In amongst digging at Marilyn, we also managed to fit in work at Cloddyke and Edward's secret dig, which is now known as Sixpence. And we even managed to visit Scales Moor with Dave Barker, possibly a first for him. A copy of my website notes have been deposited in the library, sadly uncorrected. Having read them this week, I thought, oh, that's wrong, and changed my notes. And Pete's article was published in Descent 194, for which I have to thank Pat for sending me a copy whilst I was in Madeira, because I'd given all my descents to Glenn, so I didn't have it. But there's more. During the 2006 meet, we with the help of some funding from CNCC, we installed a concrete cap holding a steel ring, but still try to retain that open aspect to the shaft. And once the concrete had cured, we put a grill there. The grill was installed so that bats can get in easily, allegedly, and so that sheep can't. So there you have it, about 50 odd meters deep, all to avoid the disappointment, bedding plane and duck. And I now wonder how many newer cavers ever actually go down the through that route into disappointment. One other thing is, whilst we're installing the concrete cap, I wandered over to what Edward called November Hole, which is just past Bar Pot. I took a ladder and went down in amongst all these cheap fence posts. He told me it was 80 feet deep, so I was slightly worried, hanging there on my own, because I don't think anybody knew I was there. And that's where we returned to, and is now known as Smeagol's. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Robert. That's very good.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob.
That was very good.
Very good. Rob.
Did you find what JNC was up to when he should have been mowing his lawn?
It was mowing his lawn. You haven't seen it before he mowed his lawn.
It's not a lawn, it's grass. That's the problem.
Is that grass?
Grass.
Sorry, grass.
The passage Rob's talking about that goes to the top of the Niagara pitch, we were lying on it, looking in, getting a howling gale, but all we could see was the floor reaching a solid wall in front of us. We said, how can we get a draft out of here? And it was actually coming up a little hole between the two. But we did look at it and couldn't understand how we were getting a draft, but knew we had to go that way because we were getting one. Yeah.
I think it frightened Rick and Pete when we were looking at this, and I thought, oh, bugger, I think you were using a crowbar or something. Thought we're never going to get it. So I climbed up the third pitch and came back down with a scaffold pole, which I just managed to get through, and gave it to them two, and they started whacking it, but I didn't think they were hitting it hard enough, and gave it some welling. Stupidly.
Rob, I don't know what I missed somewhere. Ben's Row, was that in Niagara? Had he bolted up Niagara?
Well, if you go between the second and third pitches of disappointment, as you're getting towards the third pitch, there's a huge haven there.
Yes.
And in fact, I don't know whether we caused it, but there is a pile of rock at the bottom of it. And so they bolted up the wall there. And he got to, I think he got to where the relay is, and realised he couldn't go any further because, you know, it's just absolute rubbish. Is that one?
Oh, yeah, please.
Yeah, get it now.
So, yeah, that's where it was. Yeah.
So it bolted up it, yeah.
There was an occasion once we'd pushed through as well where we managed to get across the top of Niagara into the other inlet that's coming in there. Using sort of combined techniques of helium balloons and luck, I think. I would, I'd quite happily pass on my knowledge of that area if anyone else wants to have a go, but I'll not be going back.
Well,
we think
didn't John Cordingley and Graham Proudlove, or Arthur possibly, find something high up above the pitches in Disappointment?
Cloud chamber.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think it was Pete Gray who bolted up there, and quite a few of us went up. Took a few photographs of the magnificent straws, which is why we called it Cloud Chamber.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
The bit that Gordon was talking about across Niagara is if you walk slightly uphill from Marilyn, there's a shake hole which the Bradford call stew pot. They, whilst we were digging Marilyn, they started pretending to dig that, saying, "Oh, we're going in the same direction as you. We'll get to the bottom before you do," and that is probably what feeds into the top of Niagara. But you know,
you also had both clubs taking up lots of ladders and claiming that they were getting too far deeper than the other one were. Even though neither were actually using them.
Yeah.
And towards the end of digging Marilyn, we're never too sure what Mike Wooding was up to, but on 2 occasions we know somebody had been down Marilyn. The second one, that stood on the plastic box which I'd brought to store tools in and cracked the lid. Since there were no rocks that had fallen down, we know somebody had stood on it. So we knew that somebody had been down there.
Rob, why was it called Marilyn?
The first picture.
The draft.
The draft under
The draft,
right. Yes, obviously, yes.
In the corner of it, you can't see it now because it's covered in concrete, but it blew out like crazy out there.
John accordingly assessed all the potholes on top of Ingleborough and came up with saying it's the best draft, more like a railway tunnel
in the snow.
In the snow.
Oh.
It melted far more than anywhere else on the Dells.
Well, hardly surprising when you got Disappointment Streamway pushing all that through.
Oh no.
Yeah, but it's also coming straight up from GG. Yeah.
So so we need to get Paul Norman up there with his drone tomorrow, don't we? Just to check.
Not allowed to travel.
Well, that's all right. If we send Paul, he'll be the one who cops it.
He's got quite a lot of filming up there at the moment. In fact, he's got so much that it almost looks as if there were 2 trenches, Birkbeck trenches. Howard can't tell me where on earth he came up with the idea of 2 trenches, and nobody else ever thought there were 2 trenches. But from some of the drone photographs that Paul's come up with, it almost looks as if there might have been 2 trench routes.
No, there never was.
No?
No, well, we don't think there was, but
no, because the account that Birkbeck gives, it gives the exact length dug in yards.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same length.
Yeah, well, that's
to within a yard of what you can measure it on the map.
Yeah. But we thought that, but looking at Paul's drones, you can actually see one almost going over to Grange Rig, which is where some people say Birkbeck diverted the water to.
It would make sense to do that.
Yeah.
Could it have been done for Martel then?
No.
Okay.
Martel, no. I think the reason why they did it was that they'd been down the main shaft a little way by then, hadn't they?
Yeah.
And they knew that there was water coming in from Spout Tunnel, but they didn't know where it was coming from.
Yeah.
So I think they thought, if we send it down the P5, the Grange Rig Valley, because they didn't know about Grange Rig, it was just a sink.
No.
They thought, well, maybe that's the water that's coming in through that tunnel bit. So we don't want it to go in there. We want it to go down the P5 valley. So they dug the trench all the way along that ridge until they got to the track. And then they knew once it was running down into the P5 valley, it couldn't get back into GG. I'm sure that's why they did it.
They also were worried that they couldn't put it down the shake hole behind where we have the bogs at GG. And you can actually, so they couldn't run it there. They had to keep it high up. And you can actually still walk along it if you're being a bit careful to spot it. It goes through the rushes high up above behind the bog tent. You can find it through
Corkies?
there. Yeah, behind Corkies, up the hill from Corkies. You can still find it. We did walk the people who were doing filling in the new dikes. We walked them along it to tell them that they couldn't do anything to the original Birkbeck trench. When
you look on Google Earth, it's as clear as day.
Yeah.
I said Paul's drone wants to make it look as if there is another route going across. So we need to look at it more. Have another look at it. I don't believe it's true, but it does need looking at now we've seen the drone photographs.
The interesting thing about it, of course, is that if you think about it, it starts very high up on the beck.
Yeah.
And you think, well, there's not much bloody water up there. All the water comes in from the becks down the right-hand side, the opposite side of the... So what's the problem there? But, of course, they were all captured and fed no gap sike.
Yeah.
So they never got into Fellbeck anyway, all those springs.
Yeah, the original dam was where one of the big drains came in from the Ingleborough side into the into main Fellbeck. It was about a 3 to 4 foot high dam there. No, I mean, the people who surveyed the route said it was incredibly good surveyed route because it was only dropping a very gentle level. Most people who look at it swear it's going uphill.
Yeah, it's clever.
Yeah, very.
There was a chap in the Bradford who I can't remember his name, but he was no, he was a quantity surveyor, and he worked out. He worked out how many man hours it would have taken to
that's
dig
right.
it.
Yeah, I think I've got that in the current record with an article I've done about Birkbeck. It includes the stuff about the trench. Because he did resurvey it because he hadn't realised that Leonard surveyed it. They did talk and said they got virtually the same, but he'd worked out the number of man hours, And then Martel said that Farrah's staff used 3 days to reopen the trench to make it drier for him to go down in 1895.
Yeah, because it was 50 years old then, it would have remained.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we were doing a lot of digging in 2000, early 2000s, because we did rough pot at the same time. We just had a lot of people who were digging in those days.
Rick or Rob?
Sorry?
How we're doing or what's happening with either Yorkshire hot pot or Smeagol's?
Lancashire hot pot.
Yeah, Lancashire hot pot.
They'll murder you for saying that.
Nothing's been done to it since we last extended it.
Rob's the last person who went to Smeagol's, I think.
Yeah.
No.
No?
Gordon and Nick have been down.
Have they? Right.
Yeah.
Lancashire hot pot has been capped off.
Yeah.
But you can get down it?
No.
Well, you'd have to clear all boards and rubber and all sorts of... very extensive.
It's been concreted, has it?
No, it's got those sort of plastic boards and then a lot of boulders and
right, okay.
top.
And sod.
And sod, so...
You'd be able to find it. You have to find it.
Yeah.
So it didn't really go anywhere?
No, after the digging we were doing, it hasn't been pushed any further than that, Dave.
It ended up, I think Gordon's the person who was down last, almost last.
Hot pot.
Oh, sorry, hot pot.
Yeah. It's when Dave and John Allotment and myself were digging it.
Is that when you came back up to find the draft?
Well, we got the extra extension down the bottom with the draft and
right.
the boulder.
I think Pete said to me that he thought there was still a terrific draft, but it was incredibly loose and unstable, and no one wanted to.
I think that's right.
No one wanted to.
What made it really odd was the draft used to change about 10 o'clock in the morning, which is when they switched the fan on at Ingleborough Cave. That's what we couldn't come up with any other reason why the draft changed as much.
Which drafting? Which one?
Hot pot.
Hot pot.
Right.
It's the problem with hot pot is it's blocks of rock.
Yeah.
About the size of a small car.
Yeah.
So you're working your way under those. So
I mean, we gave
enthusiasm can be a bit dimmed.
And the last time we were digging it, we gave up because we were using snappers, and we weren't making that much progress with snappers.
I can't remember where it was bottom at setting pitch, but there was a small chamber on to one side, wasn't there?
Quite a big chamber.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, well, that was where the original level went to, and then it was when we were going with John Allotment and you that we got down into the chamber underneath.
Right.
I mean, there is scope for Smeagol's, but it'll need, I think, Gordon made a comment before he's eating at the moment, but I think it would need quite a lot of organising and work to progress Smeagol's.
What, 3 pitches down?
It's
to get to the
relatively
face?
easy. It's easy to get to the end.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of stacking space at the end, but it's a case of getting power down there and making a concerted effort.
Power wouldn't be a problem. We've used generators to get power down cables to a greater distance than that, and it still worked on the drills.
I'd like to give it a go.
Yeah.
I mean, the question is, of the digs up there, should we give Sixpence a bit more of a go before?
Yeah, well, the Sixpence is open.
Hoping to. We were supposed to do it in November, but we couldn't. Supposed to do it in December, we couldn't. Supposed to be there this weekend, we couldn't.
Oh,
we are planning to get,
we're
as soon as we can get up there again, we will have another go at it. We got so much out last time, and it was looking quite promising.
Well, we got about
howling gale coming out.
We got about nearly a ton out, didn't we?
Yeah, about that. Yeah.
And then we put metre-long shot holes in again. So hopefully that
there's a clear ready waiting to be done.
Yeah.
Edward and Pete are possibly going to go and get a minimum clear, so that as soon as lockdown eases a bit more, we can go in and pop the end of it, even though we're with only a small group, before we have enough freedom to get enough people up to clear it properly.
I mean, from what I was looking at when we went down, the little archway where the howling gale was coming from, it didn't look as if there was a lot to take out before it actually opened up.
About 10 feet at the most seemed to be the general view. But I'll say we were planning to do it, but we've just been stopped by lockdown.
Yeah.
It's on the list as the next thing we do.
Where's that one going to drop in then?
It's directly above the combination of Hernal Moss and I can't remember the name of the other cave. Two of them are joined. Sorry?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they were joined almost underneath, directly underneath where we are. So we presumably might go down and drop into that.
That sounds like a good place.
Yeah. Both Paul Norman and Mike Bottomley had looked at the surveys and emailed me with maps showing how the two extended beyond their limits. The line they were travelling in would actually both link exactly below where we're digging in Sixpence.
Looking forward to some big pictures then, Rick.
Could be. Don't know whether I would be these days, but you could be right.
We went when we were up on the allotment last weekend. We had a look and found what we think was the entrance to lizard pots. So we thought that'll need a trip back with some spits and things like that.
Right.
I don't know if Russell's. I think Russell's certainly been down lizard, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there when we broke into it. It's quite an interesting experience, actually.
Yeah, lizard. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was when we.
Alan Wallbank had rather an excess of what do you call it? That stuff.
Alcohol.
Persuasion.
Yeah.
And decided he'd get rid of it by, using it in one go.
I mean, Paul Norman was the first one to get inside it, and that's why we made him a member, so that we could claim it was a club discovery.
Oh, he found it, yeah.
Yeah, but he wasn't actually a member when he found it.
The persuasion
about a month later.
The persuasion didn't entirely react, and essentially sprayed itself all over the rock. And so we all piled in to get down this thing, because there's about a 50-foot pitch just after you get in. And that night everybody had stonking headaches.
Yeah.
just to say, Russell, so the entrance, you drop down to a floor and then the pitch is just after that, or?
Yeah, I can't remember now. I think there's a kind of like small drop after you get through the entrance. You come out onto a kind of sort of fairly large sort of ledge heading off into space. And I seem to recall us rigging it on the first trip in and offered the end of the rope to Paul, and he chickened out.
Yeah, because Phil Smith had us fall down there, and the guy who did the musician.
The musician
who died.
Matthew
went down, had to go down and call out CRO. He said, "Oh yeah, we'll sort it out." Then they have to ring him back and say, "We don't know where it is. Can you tell us?" So he travelled on the back of the CRO Land Rover with boots on with big nails in the bottom of them that were ripping the Land Rover apart while they took him up for the rescue.
It does. I mean, it does look an interesting spot because it's in the same fault as Rift and Lonkin East and so.
Yeah,
on,
but
so.
the suspicion is because it's so loose that it's fault damaged. You know,
Right.
And we did dig a shaft at the bottom to try and find a way on, but it didn't work.
On the line of that rift, Pete and I have had a look, and going over the wall into Crummock, towards Crummock.
Yeah.
There's a lot more little holes down there, and there's a sort of flattish doling, very flat doling, that there's somebody's digging it in the corner because Sam Alston thought I might be something to do with it, but I've never seen anybody ever dig there, and it's been years.
is that heading towards the sort of Allen Pot area?
No.
Oh,
No,
right.
no.
Okay.
Heading towards Panorama Pots.
No, I was just thinking of Jim Davis, who's got quite a few bits of interest up there. Because he lives at he lives at Sellside, so it's not him.
No, you're near a Clapham.
Yeah.
And as I say, it doesn't look as though anybody's dug there for ages. But, you know, that's the problem. Because I've been up there so many times, I realise that nothing's happening. Whereas I think Sam was up there when he was looking at Panorama Pots for, whatever you call it, Volume 2.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Contact me about where's Panorama? Is this Panorama Pots? Yeah, it is. But then he asked about this other one. Is that a new
They
dig?
contacted me about quite a few, so I don't know whether the new guide's coming out soon. I know they've been chasing me for quite a few details. Yeah.
Still, I think we're probably not going to be doing anything much for 2 months, are we?
I mean, Sixpence is our next one that we can get to as soon as we can. I mean, we've actually been digging it for 10 years. I found the original permission for it. It doesn't have a time limit on it.
Does it not?
No.
Oh, well, that's something.
It's not as long as Pond Sink, though.
No. Well, it's a lot quicker. Well, yeah, okay, yeah. But out of the 10 years, there's quite a few years where we haven't done anything. We haven't been hammering it for 7 or 8 years non-stop. Like we have for Pond Sink. Yeah.
Well, Bob Jenkins was still alive when we started on Sixpence.
Oh, right. Okay.
Because it was him that named it.
Oh, right.
I thought it was based on Edward, having claimed he'd lost a sixpence down it.
No, I took a photograph of Edward, and he was looking down. You know that shaft that we didn't bother going down?
Yeah.
He was sort of looking into that area, and Bob Jenkins replied, "Has Edward lost sixpence?" So that's where the name came from.
Yeah.
I hadn't realised it was Bob that had labelled him.
When we were digging Smeagols, we quite often got visited by tourists who were going up to GG, who came to ask us whether it was the GG winch meat. We told them it wasn't, but said if they could stand in the bucket, we'd load them for 50p, which was a lot cheaper than GG.
Is Smeagol's named after Edward? No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Although
there's supposed to be a chamber down there.
No, just a moment, Pat. It's actually one of your father's digs. Him and Steve and Edward dug that originally, and they because of when they did it, they called it November Hole, which is not exactly a good name when you consider there's a November Hole over at Allen Pot. You know?
Yeah.
But it covered it with fence posts that it somehow acquired, and when I went down, you know, these were all jammed at about 25 foot down.
Yeah.
And he said it was 80 feet deep. Well, that load of nonsense. And with 2 chambers at the bottom. And so we started digging it. In looking at all this stuff, I've found the notes, because obviously there was a website for that.
Yeah.
And it was originally called, after November Hall, it was called Trahald, which was Smeagol's name as a hobbit before he went bad.
That's a bit esoteric.
Well, then we decided to call it Smeagol's because nobody else would know what the hell it was. But yeah.
It was an interesting place to lie on your back trying to drill into the roof.
Was that before the big pitch?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, before the second.
All right. No, because I went down a couple of times.
Yes.
Yes, getting to the second pitch is not the easiest thing in the world.
It depends what shape you are.
Well, it was.
Well, my size.
Yeah.
All right.
Tight anyway.
It was made so I could get through it.
Yeah.
But even, I don't bend as easily as you used to do.
Well, we don't.
Yeah, I found that as well.
Yeah, but the problem was that people, there was a great debate, wasn't there, as to whether you did it on SRT or ladder. And I think I was one of the few people who was happier doing it on ladder.
We always did the surface pitch on ladder.
No, the bottom pitch.
Third pitch.
What, the 70-foot pitch?
Yeah. Yeah, but it wasn't a 70, it was a 20 and a 50.
Well, whatever it is.
Yeah.
No, not the entrance, the bottom one.
No, I know where you are, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just that Pete Milner and myself went down to destroy the top of the 3rd pitch there.
Yeah.
To get rid of all that chossy calcited mud.
Yeah.
Because it scared myself to death when I went down with Pete and Gordon on ladders, and I was climbing out and they were lifelining me, and they were having no effect as lifelining because it was stuck in the mud.
Yeah.
So I was climbing, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Free, which when you've been digging, you're knackered and
Yeah.
Right, good. So we decided to get shut of that stuff in the rift, so it was a lot easier.
Well, it's one of our deepest ones for a while.
Well, I think it's only about, when you add it up, it's only about 55 meters deep.
Yeah.
But yeah, deeper than most of what we've done. But over to younger people.